A poor young girl was forced to wed a man older than her father, but what followed shocked everyone. The village of Darapur lay hidden between dry hills, where dust clung to the skin like a curse and poverty seemed to seep into the very soil. Houses were built of mud and straw, and the villagers measured life in sacks of grain, jars of water, and the mercy of landlords who never seemed to have enough. In one of those houses lived Amara, a slender girl of barely 16. Her hands were rough from grinding flour, her feet cracked from carrying water, yet her eyes still carried the innocence of dreams. She was poor, yes, but she often whispered to herself that she had at least one treasure, the courage to hope. Her father, Rafiq, was a worn-out farmer who bent his back to another man's land. He had debts that grew like weeds no matter how much he tried to cut them down. Amara's mother had died giving birth to her younger brother, who in turn never survived the winter. That left Rafiq with only Amara, a child who had grown too fast, forced to be both daughter and homemaker. 4 years, Amara endured hardship with patience. She rose with the sun, lit the stove, prepared bread, and swept the dirt floors. Sometimes, when the work was done, she would sit under the neem tree and dream about a better life. Maybe, she thought, someone kind would see her worth and take her away from all this. But the world is often crueler than a girl's dreams. The bargain. One evening, Rafiq came home with trembling hands and sunken eyes. He avoided Amara's gaze, though she hurried to serve him bread and lentils. "Baba, you look tired," she said softly. "Did the landlord demand more?" He chewed silently, then wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. "Amara, we cannot keep living like this. The debts are swallowing us. I am old, my body can no longer work the way it used to. There is only one way left." Her heart skipped. She had heard such tones before, in the whispers of women at the well. "What way, Baba?" Rafiq lowered his eyes. "Tomorrow, you will be betrothed. The arrangement is made." The bread fell from her fingers. Betrothed? To whom? His silence was more terrifying than any answer. Finally, he spoke, "To Haji Karim." The name froze her blood. Haji Karim was the wealthiest man in Darapur, a widower past 60. His beard was white, his belly heavy, and his reputation heavier still. He had already buried 2 wives and was known for his harshness. Children ran when he walked by. Amara's lips trembled. "Baba, he is older than you. He could be my grandfather." Rafiq's eyes filled with tears. "Do you think I don't know that? Do you think this decision is easy for me? But he has promised to forgive my debts if you become his wife. Otherwise, they will throw us into the streets. We will have nothing." Amara's world collapsed in a single breath. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell her father that no amount of debt was worth her freedom. But she saw his frail frame, his trembling shoulders. Poverty had already broken him. He had nothing left to offer her but survival, and even that came at the price of her youth. That night, she lay awake on her mat, staring at the cracked ceiling. The moonlight spilled through the holes in the roof, touching her face like a cruel reminder. Tomorrow, she would no longer be Amara, the dreaming girl. She would be Amara, the wife of an old man. The wedding. The ceremony was swift and merciless. Villagers gathered, some out of curiosity, others to witness the strange sight of a girl so young standing beside a man who leaned on a cane. Amara wore a red bridal dress borrowed from a neighbor, its sequins dull from age. Her head was covered, her eyes lowered. Inside her, storms raged, but her lips spoke only the words demanded by custom. Haji Karim sat proudly, his wrinkled face stretching into a smile that never reached his eyes. When he placed the garland around her neck, she felt the weight of chains. Some villagers whispered in pity. Others muttered, "At least her father's debts are cleared. Better this than starvation." But no one asked the bride what she felt. That night, when the guests left and silence returned to Karim's large, cold house, Amara sat on the edge of the bed like a statue. She stared at the shadows on the wall, trying to silence the pounding of her heart. Karim walked in slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. His voice was low, smug. "From today, you are mine. You will serve me, respect me, and give me children. In return, you will have a roof, food, and my name. That is enough for a girl like you." Amara bit her lip to keep from crying. She wanted to vanish into the darkness, to become wind, water, anything but this fragile body trapped in a stranger's home. The days that followed. Life with Karim was nothing like the dreams she once whispered under the neem tree. He was strict, quick to anger, and demanded obedience. Amara cooked, cleaned, and served, her hands blistered and her spirit caged. Yet, she discovered something strange. Karim's household, despite its wealth, was empty. No children ran in the courtyard, no laughter filled the rooms. His own relatives visited rarely, treating him with cold politeness. For all his money, Karim was a lonely man. One evening, as Amara placed food before him, she noticed him watching her silently. His eyes, though stern, carried a glimmer she couldn't understand. "You are not like the others," he muttered. "The village girls chatter and complain. You are quiet, like your mother was." Amara lowered her gaze, but inside, she wondered, was this cruelty softening? Or was it just another trap? Days turned into weeks, and slowly, she learned something more shocking. Beneath Karim's harshness was a man haunted by loss. His first wife had died in childbirth, his second from illness. He had buried his children before they could walk. Each death had carved bitterness into his soul. Amara, despite herself, began to see beyond the cane and the wrinkles. She saw a broken man who had sought to buy youth to ease his loneliness. But did that make her suffering less? Did that make this forced marriage right? No. And yet, destiny was already weaving threads neither of them could see. The first crack of change. One night, a storm struck the village. Winds tore at the thatched roofs, and rain poured like the sky itself was grieving. Amara rushed to secure the animals in the courtyard while Karim struggled with the shutters. When a beam loosened and nearly fell upon him, it was Amara who pushed him out of the way, her small frame shielding him from the crash. She scraped her arm badly, blood trickling down, but she did not cry out. Karim stared at her in shock. Why would you do that?" She answered simply, "Because I could not watch another person die." That night, something shifted. Karim looked at her differently, not just as property, but as a life bound to his. He sat by her as she cleaned her wound, silent, almost guilty. And for the first time since her marriage, Amara dared to think, perhaps this story was not yet written to its end. The storm passed, leaving broken roofs and flooded fields in its wake. The villagers complained about their ruined crops, but in Karim's house, something far more important had changed. For the first time, Amara felt her husband's silence was not born of anger but of thought. He had watched her bind her wound with strips of cloth, her small hands steady despite the pain. And in his old heart, something stirred, a feeling he had buried long ago. The house awakens. In the days that followed, Karim's tone softened. He still barked commands, but less often. He began to ask her if she had eaten, if she needed rest. To the villagers, this was unthinkable. Haji Karim, the proud, ruthless landlord, caring about a girl young enough to be his granddaughter? But Amara noticed it. She felt his gaze following her when she worked in the kitchen, his sighs when he thought no one was listening. One morning, as she swept the courtyard, she heard him call her. "Amara." "Yes, Haji Sahib," she answered cautiously. His cane tapped against the ground as he walked closer. "Don't call me Haji Sahib. You are my wife. Call me Karim." She froze, the broom trembling in her hands. To her, he had always been a shadow of power, a man to be endured. Now, he wanted to be seen as something else. She lowered her eyes. "Gee, Karim." He nodded, satisfied, and for the first time, she saw him smile, not the prideful smirk of a rich man, but the weary smile of someone who had long forgotten gentleness. The village whispers. The village was quick to notice. Women at the well whispered that Amara must have worked some magic. Men scoffed that Karim was too old to control his young bride. But the truth was simpler. Kindness, even forced into a barren house, had begun to bloom. Amara still struggled with the chains of her marriage. She had not chosen this life. Yet, she realized something shocking. Karim was no longer just her jailer. He was also her dependent. He leaned on her strength, her patience, her quiet endurance. And soon, a test would come that revealed this bond to the whole village. The fever. One night, Karim collapsed with a high fever. His body shivered violently, his lips muttering the names of the wives and children he had lost. Servants panicked, but it was Amara who took charge. She placed wet cloths on his forehead, boiled herbs, and stayed awake by his side for 3 nights straight. Her hands never left his, her whispers calming him when the fever made him thrash. On the 4th day, when he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Amara's tear-streaked face leaning over him. "You stayed," he croaked. "Yes," she whispered. "Where else could I go?" In that moment, Karim broke. The old man who had bought a young girl with debt suddenly felt smaller than she. He pressed her hand weakly. "Forgive me, Amara. I stole your youth. I forced you into this life. Yet you cared for me like no one ever has." Tears blurred her vision. For years she had been forced to bear burdens, but never had anyone acknowledged her pain. Hearing it from him, her husband, shook her to her core. From that day on, Karim changed completely. A different marriage. He stopped treating her like a servant. He no longer demanded obedience but requested it with respect. He began to listen to her thoughts, her wishes. One evening he surprised her by saying, "Amara, you should study. I will hire a tutor for you." Her heart raced. No one had ever spoken to her of education before. She had been born to work, not to dream. But Karim insisted. And soon, a teacher came to the house, guiding her through letters and numbers. The girl who once stared at the cracked ceiling now filled pages with words, her mind blossoming. The village was stunned. Haji Karim, who had once mocked women for seeking knowledge, was now encouraging his young wife to learn. Some ridiculed him, others envied Amara. But neither of them cared. For the first time, their house echoed with life. The will. Months passed, and Karim grew weaker. Age and illness weighed on him, but his spirit seemed lighter. One morning, he summoned the village elders. Amara stood by, confused, as he spoke with surprising strength. "I, Haji Karim, make this my will. All my lands, all my wealth, all my property, I leave to my wife, Amara." Gasps filled the room. The elders exchanged shocked glances. Women outside the door whispered furiously. Amara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Karim, why?" He looked at her with the same tired smile. "Because you gave me something no gold or land could buy. You gave me care, respect, and a chance to die in peace. I cannot return your youth, but I can give you freedom and power. Use it well, Amara. Live the life you deserve." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She wanted to protest, to tell him she had never asked for wealth. But deep down, she knew this was his way of setting her free. The final goodbye. Karim's health declined rapidly. Amara sat by his side every evening, reading aloud from the lessons she had learned. Sometimes he listened with closed eyes, smiling faintly. One night, he held her hand and whispered, "Amara, when I meet God, I will tell him that though I lived long, my true life began only when you entered my house." By morning, he was gone. The village mourned, though many whispered more about the shocking will than his death. How could the richest man leave everything to a poor girl? But Amara did not care for their whispers. She buried him with her own hands, her tears falling silently into the earth. The girl who rose. In the weeks that followed, Amara's life changed beyond imagination. She was no longer the poor farmer's daughter bound by debts. She was the owner of Karim's estate, the mistress of lands and wealth. Men who once mocked her now bowed. Women who pitied her now envied her. But Amara did not let bitterness guide her. She used the wealth to repair villagers' homes, to build a school where girls could study freely, to provide grain for those in need. She lived not as a tyrant, but as someone who had tasted suffering and vowed no other girl would endure what she had. Her story spread beyond Darapur. People came from nearby villages to see the young widow who had been forced into marriage with a man older than her father, yet rose from it stronger, wealthier, and kinder than anyone expected. The shock that remained. The same villagers who once whispered in pity now spoke with awe. She was a poor girl forced into marriage, but she turned her fate into power. She served an old man, yet he left her his empire. She was once broken, but now she heals others. No one had expected it. Not her father, who wept when he saw how high his daughter had risen. Not the women, who now brought their daughters to her school. Not the men, who bowed to the young widow who ruled with compassion. And perhaps, not even Amara herself. Epilogue. Years later, Amara sat under the same neem tree where she once dreamed as a child. Children's laughter rang in the distance. The school she had built was full of life. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I was forced into a fate I did not choose. But what followed? It gave me the strength to choose for myself." The wind rustled the branches above, carrying her words across the village, a reminder that sometimes the most painful beginnings can lead to the most unexpected triumphs.